Hi, Christina.
Hi, Scott. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you, especially after having spent a good deal of time when you were a student here, um, and both really zeroing in on the study of law, but also the study and practice of mindfulness. And so I think that's going to be a really, for me, meaningful part of our conversation. And I think very helpful to others who are, many of whom, starting off on the path of the study and practice of mindfulness. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what's been going on in the life of Christina Sava since you graduated?
Sure. Yeah, I'm definitely happy to be come back and share a little bit. And since right after graduating law school, I moved to California. I became a cannabis regulatory compliance attorney in the Bay Area. Did that for about 5 years. I always was interested in going into regulatory compliance, and that was a really interesting space to do that. I came back to Virginia where I grew up and became a tobacco regulatory compliance attorney, tobacco for the tobacco and nicotine industries, with the goal of learning more about FDA regulation in the space. And I recently had a job change and am now back doing more cannabis and hemp work and focusing also on the food and beverage industries with a focus on wellness focused brands.
Ah, and you brought wellness into the legal profession itself. I know with Young Lawyers Division and in other ways at the level of the American Bar Association.
I did. I was part of the ABA Young Lawyers Division's mindfulness efforts and bringing mindfulness programming to conferences and CLE programs put on by the Young Lawyers Division.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
It was my
Uh,
pleasure.
so what got you interested in mindfulness? And, we can use that term broadly. Can, mindfulness practices to advance sort of greater mindfulness, wellness more broadly, however you would want to zero in on it. But ultimately, of course, we'll wind our way to mindfulness and mindfulness practices proper.
Right. Yeah, I think everybody's journey to these practices is so can be so different. Mine personally started with an interest in yoga and, fitness through yoga, and then found out yoga is about more than just fitness of the body, but there's also a mental, emotional, spiritual component. And I think when I was introduced to the modern day mindfulness teachings, I realized it was a way to bring these classic Eastern teachings that I was learning through yoga to the population at large, or integrate these teachings and make them more accessible for the modern day person dealing with our modern day issues.
Uh, and what are some of the benefits that you sort of come to both personally and professionally about the practicing of mindfulness?
Gosh, there's so many, and engaging in mindfulness practices over the long term has allowed various has become really a part of the way I operate. At first, it was more awkward, or maybe felt more like an intentional, I had to set aside time to practice, do a mindfulness practice. But over time, it's really become more integrated into the way I operate. For me, I think noticing when I'm not in an optimal space to maybe make a decision, or how to do a settling practice to get back into an optimal space to deal with what's in front of me instead of sort of pushing through. Lawyers are, I think, very good at pushing through, and that's not always the optimal way to show up, and not the best way. And over the long term, I think can kind of be a destructive habit to ignore signals from the body, for instance, about stress, and um, not deal with health problems that might come up, or mental, emotional issues. So having a mindfulness practice really has allowed me to take better care of myself as I move through being an attorney.
And do you find related to that the performance of being an attorney, the work that you do, the quality of the work, time management, that aspect also moves in tandem with the wellness piece that you just spoke to?
Absolutely. I think back to my time in big law as a tobacco regulatory attorney, and the workload was very demanding, and the expectations, the time expectations, my understanding is they've gotten shorter and shorter of when clients want answers to really complex issues. And without the tools that I've gained through mindfulness practices over the years, I would have easily become overwhelmed with the workload, not been able to focus on providing a good quality work product, or maybe have the urge to send something out the door before proofreading it as much as it needed to be, everything from an email to a memo. I think that mindfulness has allowed me to, regardless of sort of what's happening outside of the immediate task at hand, really focus on creating a good work product. And then the way you interact with your coworkers and your boss and your clients, if you're able to use a settling practice, a settling technique to not show up frazzled, you're going to have a smoother experience and better interactions.
And I take it that the settling technique that you might draw upon to not show up frazzled doesn't just happen out of the blue. How is it that, and in what ways has the practice of mindfulness allowed you to more readily deliver on drawing upon a settling technique that can be optimally suited for that particular situation?
Well, the mindfulness practice, for me, one very important that you teach your students is the body scan, which I think is so critically important to noticing when you might not be in an optimal space to handle what's in front of you. So, I've really benefited from that practice to be able to pause in the moment of feeling anxiety or feeling fear or dread or any other negative emotion that might come up during the day, to be able to pause and really do something to quell that so that I can come back and perform more with a clearer mind.
So let's go back a little bit to when you were in the mindfulness and law class. What year was that?
Oh my goodness, 2013 or 14?
Could you say a little bit about sort of what you took away from, maybe a little bit about the class experience?
Well, like I mentioned, I was already interested in yoga and wellness in general. And what I got from the mindfulness and law class is really that there is a place for these practices in the professional legal world. Not only is there a place for mindfulness and being a self-aware attorney and an attorney who's committed to their own self-improvement and their own physical and mental health, but it's really necessary that we integrate this into the practice of law and into the legal profession in general.
So now that you're practicing, you've been practicing law for a while and doing some very interesting and cutting edge areas of the law, which I would imagine carry a lot of uncertainty. It's a rapidly evolving area. The laws are changing. You have to offer guidance to clients who want answers, when sometimes the answer is we don't know the answer, but we can do the best we can. So given the climate and all the different sort of ways that you might speak to the experience of practicing law, how have you integrated mindfulness practices and settling techniques into your workday, into your life, personally, as well as, of course, professionally?
Yeah, I think that's been really the most important journey. My use of mindfulness practices and creating the space for them has, at first I was always judging myself for not creating enough time for a mindfulness practice. And then over time, it's become more integrated, just staying committed to making that part of my toolkit of how I deal with things that come up, and staying connected to communities of people that engage in mindfulness practices like the Mindfulness and Law Society or a local meditation group has really helped to integrate that into my life. I think that's one of the most crucial, is having, for me, I've been fortunate and enjoyed leading mindfulness practices. So I show up, that forces me to show up and practice and to keep my practice going. But so I do maintain a personal meditation practice. The practicing self-awareness of what I need to function well as a lawyer, whether that's rest or nourishment, sometimes just stopping what you're doing to eat a meal is a mindfulness practice, because again, we're so tempted to push through, or time with friends and family, having, a break from work is important so that I can show up to work and be clear-headed and ready to go. I think too, the value of mindfulness in general in my life has been that it's something that promotes self-searching. First, there's self-awareness that comes from it, which then leads to more of a self-searching and inevitably some self-improvement when you become aware of what's going on for you, or you have certain things that elicit the same responses in you over and over. You are probably going to be more likely to seek out the tools, whether it's a mindfulness related tool or whether it's something outside of that realm to help you improve.
So going back a moment when you spoke to the ways that you might, so for example, you said eat when you might otherwise not, and it's time to get some nutrition, and you might otherwise think you're going to push through, but now you're going to pause or take a break and eat something. And then you just spoke to, I like the way you said it, you sort of had self-aware to self-improve.
The self-awareness to some self-searching, and then
Self-searching.
improvement of, self-searching of what is going on with me.
So can you tie that into because we can say to people, eat well, don't miss a meal, or whatever it might be. And yet, while we know that, or many things that we know are good for us during the busyness of the day and the franticness, or however we might construe a busy day, things can be elusive. And so when you sort of said self-awareness leads to self-searching, leads to self-improvement, it seems to connect the dots to opening up some possibilities, so that the gap between what we know would be good for us and our intentions and what we actually deliver on for ourselves can actually come closer together.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lifelong journey, I think. And what the way for me that's come closer together is that being mindful, being self-aware, usually when I'm tempted to push through and ignore or not make space for the things that I know are good for me, it's when I feel anxious or fearful or overwhelmed by work and obligations and things that are going on in my life. And so mindfulness practices allow me to sort of settle the mind, not allow anxiety or the urgency or a sense of impending doom to take over and cause me to ignore all, creating the space for the other things. And then it's kind of like an exhale where, you can acknowledge that the thing making the space for something that is a self-care practice, I guess we could say, is the thing that's going to support you. For instance, getting your memo done. For me, it was, there's a lot of like, I feel like I have no time to get up from working on this thing, but actually sleep or nap, a meal is the thing that's going to allow me to finish the thing on time and well.
Can you say a little bit about how a mindfulness practice that's done on a regular basis, like maybe the body scan comes to mind, as it relates to anxiety and impulses and a fear, the very things that you just spoke to, how practicing something like the body scan or any of the practices on a regular basis as seemingly an end unto themselves, not so that in the next moment something changes, like drastically, or even that we feel better in the next moment necessarily, but that then over time, in the moments where fear arises and anxiety arises and impulses emerge, and like you said, the thought, like I just got to push through this because I have to, that body scan might be cultivating qualities of awareness, in this case of the body, among other things, that can be very useful to actually being able to make the pivot that you're speaking to, that can be so useful to make.
Right.
But oftentimes we don't.
Well, the body scan, which is something we can practice daily, is over time, I think it supports the mind body connection. And then over time, you notice that, or I've noticed that I automatically associate a certain thought or thought pattern with some sensation in the body. And there isn't so much lag time between them. Whereas maybe earlier on, there's the thought or the fear or the thing that comes up, and then only later down the line do we notice, oh, and I, now I'm feeling nauseous, or I feel this knot in my stomach, or and then the thoughts kind of overwhelm anything that's happening in the body. And I think a body scan practice builds that connection and creates a quicker association of feelings in the body and thought with thoughts in the mind.
Do you remember when you were in class when Judge Chris McAlilly came and she shared a practice that she loves that she learned from Pema Chodron, a mindfulness teacher, called drop the story, feel the energy? I know this is going back a long time,
Yes.
where sounds like it sort of is apt for what you just sort of described. You realize that your body is agitated or caught. You have that earlier noticing, and her that what she found so useful was drop the story, because you also just spoke to that, and I love that, the lag time. Like there's this story, and sort of lagging behind it is the sensations in the body that's really fueling the story. And if you notice those sensations sooner, that lag time drops, then something changes. And then, I think for a lot of people, it's like, well, what changes? How does it change? And you're sort of pointing to that process. We drop the story, to use that settling technique, and we notice the energy. What happens when you do notice sooner the sensations in the body? How does that, for you, facilitate a shift in the activity of the mind?
I think for me, noticing the sensations of the body, it's like, okay, this is the first thing to deal with. If I'm having an uncomfortable experience in my body, that's my signal to engage in a settling technique or a practice, or get up and go for a walk, or take a deep breath, or pause. And then when that energy in the body settles is when the mind is also becomes less caught up in the story. So oftentimes, I try to deal with the body first rather than solve the problem that I think is happening in the mind. And I think it was so powerful for Judge McAlilly to share that practice as someone who sits on a bench and there's so much happening in front of her in real time. Even for her, it's important to notice not to ignore what's happening in the body as she's problem solving and dealing with what's in front of her.
Do you find that the sooner you notice agitation in the body, that the noticing begins to settle, the settling process begins just by virtue of the noticing, and noticing it sooner before it has an opportunity to become as big as it might otherwise?
I definitely think so. It doesn't, one thing is that I've experienced is that just because I have these tools doesn't mean I don't experience the discomfort. So even in my job, when I felt that I had made a mistake. Like I had that pit in my stomach and it was really uncomfortable. And I felt just, but observing, for me, the observation, a lot of it too, was allowing those sensations to sort of run their course and not act in the midst of sensation. So even though it was uncomfortable to feel, my heart rate rising and the blood pumping and the pit in my stomach, if I could stay with the sensation, it would run its course much sooner than if I engaged with the story in the mind, and tried to problem solve from that space.
Can you think of an example of some time in the practice of law where sort of the emotional regulation became really helpful to you? Just sort of speak generally to what a situation might have been like.
Yeah, so many. I think when I speak about the memo thing, like this was a real thing. I would be tasked with this complicated question, and to just sometimes you're staring at a blank page in front of you and you don't know where to start. And so having some, and then there's a short deadline to get it done. So it was always important for me to self-regulate and practice the settling technique in order to engage with the project properly. And one interesting example that came to mind for me, I think that mindfulness has helped me, being mindful, being self-aware, helped me to make a career, not a career pivot, but switch jobs when it was time to do so, instead of pushing forward and getting stuck or being in a situation that wasn't in line with my long-term goals and maybe wasn't ideal for me at the time. And I was able to weigh sort of the risks and the rewards of staying or going. And ultimately, I think that allowed me to make a decision that's been more supportive of my career goals.
Yes, yes. That's nice to hear. There's so much in that in terms of job satisfaction, career satisfaction, and being at the top of your game, and not being stuck. So that's
And it
huge.
wasn't, it was a scary decision. And in some ways, it was taking a step into an unknown. But being self-aware that, this is scary and I'm going to move forward anyway, sort of allowed me to make that change with a little more grace than I think I would have otherwise.
Now, we know early on when we're learning mindfulness practices, we learn a couple of different kind. In the mindfulness law class, we learn focused attention, body scan, open monitoring, connection, mindful self-compassion, sort of this family of primary practices. And they all have so many different variations across different teachers and different trainings and different traditions. And yet they all have fundamental things in common. And across them all, fundamental things in common. And in time, as somebody like you sort of is very experienced in different practices and then has been practicing over years, drawing upon that which resonates with you, and you also mentioned, I know you're a yogi and a strong yoga practice, we can come up with creative variations where we sort of, the practice becomes very much informed by our own preferences and experiences and the scenarios we find ourselves in. Any creative, like if somebody were to say, hey, what's a Christina Sava practice that I might want to do, that I can do in a little bit of time, that they would learn about it and go, oh, that's sort of like a this. And you'd be like, yeah, it's like a that, but it's got my little flavor to it. Anything like that you might share?
Well, one thing is that I do use my phone to remind me to check in with myself. So I have little reminders that pop up in the morning, afternoon, and evening about just a self check-in. So I can pause what I'm doing and say, what do I need? Do I need anything in this moment that's different than what I'm currently doing? And that's been a great way to sort of pull back and reassess and reset if necessary. As you were saying that, I think my rebounder came to mind. I've found that to be, Yeah, the little trampoline that is a great way of creating energy when I'm feeling sort of a lull in energy. So that's been one tool that I've used, and that's been really simple. I think another really important subject that we could have a whole nother discussion on is how we stay focused in this environment of so many tools and apps and are just hyper connectivity creates a new challenge around staying focused in the present moment. And so for me, thinking about what's in front of me, whether it's cooking or doing work or talking with a friend, like that is the mindfulness practice in the moment to stay present with that and try to avoid other distractions. So whatever tools, there's so many out there now to sort of silence, and there's lots of tips and guides, and I'm sure you discuss this in class with the students as well, of how we can intentionally create an environment where it's easier to stay present with what's in front of us.
I love that because it sounds like those are important times that you will spend with yourself cooking or with other people, and to be able to use that, if, as I'm hearing this, it becomes the practice. Like, I'm here cooking, let me be here with the food, and I'm here with a friend, let me be here for the conversation, so that if your mind wanders or you get pulled away and you realize it, you come back. And so that is having the object of attention not be the breath, but food or a friend, a conversation. And it also makes the experience, I would take it, a much more satisfying and meaningful
Yes.
one. So it's both. It's a practice, and it improve it enhances the quality of the moment.
I think so. And for me, I always remembered what you taught about multitasking and how we can't actually multitask, that that's an illusion. And what I've noticed is when I'm in a habit of multitasking or being on, in the midst of cooking, responding to text messages or during the workday, overall my experience of life is not as positive, or I feel more stressed in general when I'm multitasking, regardless of what I'm doing. Then it's much easier to feel overwhelmed and stressed by, the demands of daily life.
Yeah. So I love the setting your timer. So if anybody, is watching this, they might be asking, well, what times do you set it for? So obviously it can be idiosyncratic, but you've been doing this. What times do you set your watch your phone for? I take it's a phone.
Yeah, the first one goes off around 9 a.m. So like the start of the workday, like 'cause I have a tendency to just sort of wake up and maybe rush through my morning and get to sitting in front of the computer. So having a moment to pause and see like, okay, am I really ready? Or is there something else that I need or could use? And then I think 2:30 p.m. and six or no, the last one maybe is in the evening, 8 or 9 p.m. And that might be a reminder to what do I need to wind down the day, get ready for sleep, and having a restful evening.
And so when the alarm goes off, you literally inquire, like you sort of like you pause, take a little bit of a momentary, it sounds like it can just be a few moments, but a momentary wake up call to check in with yourself. And one of the phrases, what do I need if it's different than what is currently
Mhm.
unfolding?
Yeah. What, first there's the awareness piece. Like, okay, what's happening right now? Maybe I'm in the middle of a really busy workday. There's a lot going on. Sometimes it's like, oh, I've been jumping from call to call or task to task for the last 4 or 5 hours without break. And that's what's been happening. And I'm starting to feel the effects of that. So there's becoming aware. And then, okay, is there something else I could do or something that I could help me reset before moving on and moving forward with the day? I think it literally comes up as self check-in on my phone. It's like
That's
time to
really nice.
check in with yourself.
Well, I would be delighted if, as we close, and thank you so much for taking the time and sharing and bringing up nice memories as well, and inspiring me with some of the things that you've shared, that I like that idea of setting the timer for a couple times. a day, and having the question and posing the question. I think that's an important two-parter. Both can be okay unto themselves, but to bring them together, I think, is very rich. Would you guide us in a 6-minute practice?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. I'd like to say one more thing about the self check-in. I think it's an interesting tool too, because I've had times where I've had the reminder to time to sit for 5 minutes. And that's not always the thing, sometimes I'll look at it and ignore it because that's not what's available to me in the moment, or I just, whatever reason, I have resistance. So the self check-in creates more options. It's like, what would be helpful in this moment? It might be a brief walk, or it might be a snack, or it might be sitting for 5 minutes. So yeah, I would love to lead a practice. And I think I stressed a lot the importance of my mind-body connection and becoming aware of what's happening in the body. So love to lead a quick body scan. I know that one of the popular ways is to start scanning from the feet upwards. And for purposes of sort of a quicker body scan, I usually go from the head down. And so that's what I'll guide us through today. So coming to a comfortable seat. We're upright and stable, but relaxed. Taking a deep breath in through the nose, sighing it out through the mouth. Again, a deep breath in through the nose, sighing the breath out through the mouth. And one more time, maybe taking your deepest breath of the day in through the nose and out through the mouth. If you haven't already, you can lower the gaze or close the eyes. Hands are in your lap, palms facing up or down. Allowing the breath to find its natural rhythm. Starting to become aware of what's happening in the head, softening the eyebrows, the forehead, and even the skin around the skull. Softening around the jaw and the temples. You might even feel like your eyeballs recede back into their sockets a little bit. And scanning down through the neck and the shoulders, the chest and the upper back, noticing if you're holding any tension, maybe softening with an exhale. Moving the awareness through the arms, down into the tips of the fingers and the palms of the hands. Moving the awareness through the torso, noticing the rise and fall of the rib cage with the breath. Softening the belly, releasing any tension in the abdomen. You can notice where the body is making contact with the chair, which is usually the lower part of the body where we've moved our awareness. Scanning through the hips and the thighs. Noticing sensation as we move into the knees, down to the lower part of the legs, the calves and the shins. All the way into the soles of the feet and the tips of the toes, noticing if you can feel any sensation in the feet. And to me, part of the body scan practice is just remembering that we have a body and we're not just a mind and thoughts racing through the world. So just taking in the whole body, sitting in the chair. Softening into your experience on the exhales. I like to close the practice with another 3 deep breaths, this time in and out through the nose at your own pace. Breathing in through the nose when you're ready. Slow, mindful breaths. At the end of your last breath, letting your eyes drift open. That's our quick body scan, again, to remind us that we have a body.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you for inviting me, Scott. It was a pleasure.